perceives its maritime strategic space as being squeezed. The East and the South China Seas are viewed as a site of strategic vulnerability for China, a springboard for potential invaders. In response to this strategic squeezing, Beijing has sought to territorialize these near seas. Territorialization refers to the ways in which states exert, perform, and narrate sovereignty over maritime area. In other words, how they seek to extend the type of control and authority that is typically associated with land over the sea. This presentation examines how and why China has sought to territorialize the South China Sea as a way of coping with the perceptions that its strategic space is being squeezed. These perceptions have emerged as a consequence of its maritime geography, a sense of encirclement by foreign military bases in East Asia, and a history of intervention by other powers via the near seas. Geography plays an important role in Chinese perspectives that its maritime entitlements have been squeezed. This map looks out over the South China Sea from China's perspective. In 1982, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, also known as UNCLOS, provided a framework for establishing maritime boundaries and adjudicating maritime disputes that might arise in cases of clashing claims. Under UNCLOS, the South China Sea is defined as a semi-enclosed sea, as it is surrounded by land that is controlled by 8 literal actors: China, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Singapore, and Indonesia. UNCLOS also introduced a novel new maritime jurisdiction, the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ, which can extend 200 nautical miles from a coastal state's baseline. This encouraged states to make official claims over maritime area. As we can see, semi-enclosed seas can create issues of squeezing because bordering states may be unable to claim the full 200 nautical mile entitlement to an EEZ because of overlaps with the maritime claims of adjacent or opposite states. There is also the added complication of the more than 250 land features that dot the South China Sea. How these land features are classified as rocks, islands, or low-lying elevations affects the extent to which they can generate a maritime jurisdiction. If they're islands, for example, they may be eligible to a full 200 nautical mile EEZ. Perceptions of strategic space are also shaped by the concept of island chains. Strategic encirclement and the first island chain concept resonates with Chinese strategists. The island chain concept was originally conceived by US military officials in the 1940s, and it helped inform the US's East Asia policy in the early 1950s, particularly the strategic use of bases to constrain China's space. According to Andrew Erickson and Joel Woodnow, by the 1980s it was evident that the island chain concept had entered into official Chinese discourse. The first island chain consists of a thread of military bases running from Japan down through the Philippines archipelago that could project power and deny access to the sea. Strategists have also conceived of second and third island chains and even fourth and fifth island chains, forming a layered approach to strategic space. Importantly, the South China Sea falls within the first island chain. The establishment of US bases and installations on the first island chain contributes to a sense that China's strategic space is being squeezed. The same can be said for those bases and installations on the second island chain and beyond. Within the first island chain, Beijing's anti-access area denial strategy may therefore be interpreted in one way as a defensive approach designed to prevent other military powers from using the sea, especially in ways that are inimical to China's own security interests. While this approach requires anti-access air and maritime missile and defensive capabilities, it also relies upon being able to assert control and authority over maritime space. China's assertions have escalated in recent years as a response to other South China Sea littoral states asserting their legal maritime claims. In 2009, Malaysia and Vietnam provided a joint submission to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf outlining their continental shelf claims. This joint submission of continental shelf claims further compounded a sense of strategic squeezing. While coastal states' claims overlap and cut into each other, this problem is exacerbated by China's controversial claim to historic rights within the Nine-Dash Line in the South China Sea. China sought to revive the Nine-Dash Line by attaching a map from the 1940s in its response to Vietnam and Malaysia's joint submission. Based on approximations by US Department of State, the dashed line encompasses over 2 million square kilometres of maritime space, an area that is equal to around 22% of China's land area and 90% of the South China Sea. The 2009 map, however, is not consistent with other published Chinese maps. Maps are a form of discourse. States and empires have long drawn lines on maps to reconstruct reality and assert power through claim making. What meaning can be derived from the use of dashes in maritime mapping? What claims are being made through these maps? China's officials do not provide a precise definition of what is claimed by or within the Nine-Dash Line, beyond sovereignty over land features and sovereign rights over their adjacent waters. This ambiguity leaves much space for interpretation of China's Nine-Dash Line claim. The three main interpretations are: it is a sovereign claim to the land features within the Nine-Dash Line. Second, it is a maritime border reflecting China's sovereignty over land features within the Nine-Dash Line, as well as its sovereign rights to maritime area. And third, it is a claim to sovereignty over the entire land and maritime area. Some Chinese analysts argue that the use of dashes rather than a continuous line reflects a maritime boundary rather than a territorial boundary. Yet the uses of dashes is unusual for maritime boundaries as well. The third interpretation, meanwhile, is encapsulated by the term blue territory, which combines China's commitment to territorial sovereignty with a desire to extend and expand the control and authority that typically is associated with territorial sovereignty far beyond its coastline. This presents a challenge to some of the key ideas underpinning international law of the sea, in particular the notion of the free seas, the idea that beyond the 12 nautical mile territorial sea, the seas do not belong to any one state or actor. Territorialization of this kind is a response to strategic squeezing. There are four main ways in which China's territorialization in the South China Sea is occurring. The first type of territorialization is physical. This has been described as the wall of sand. From 2013, China engaged in rapid artificial island building in the South China Sea, creating thousands of acres of new land. This physical territorialization, the creation of land within a maritime space, supports the exertion of sovereignty over maritime area in two key ways. First, it may provide China an avenue to claim maritime jurisdiction around the artificial islands. But under UNCLOS, such claims are not legal. UNCLOS explicitly rules out artificial islands generating their own maritime jurisdictions, such as an EEZ. Second, the militarisation of these artificial islands, along with non-artificial land features, can support efforts to control maritime space and deter others from using maritime space. In other words, this militarisation can support an anti-access area denial strategy within the first island chain. The second type of territorialisation is legal. This has multiple dimensions. First, China has established administrative structures to legitimize its authority to create and enforce laws and consolidate administrative control over land and sea areas. China has also sought to legally territorialize the South China Sea by viewing it as a sui generis zone subject to Chinese national legislation rather than international law. It has also used quasi-legal justifications for spreading control over maritime area, for example through the Four Sha or Four Sands concept, which would see the adoption of straight archipelagic baselines around the Pratas Islands, Paracel Islands, Spratly Islands and Macclesfield Bank. This would not conform with UNCLOS, which states that the ratio of the area must be between 1:1 and 9:1, criteria that is not met by the Four Sha concept. The third type of territorialization is operational. This involves using military and civilian assets to extend and exert sovereign-like control over maritime area and to enforce domestic laws over maritime area claims. We've already seen this in relation to the militarization of land features, but this militarization is supported by the ways in which China has sought to flood maritime area with naval and non-naval vessels, including coast guards, fishing boats, and survey vessels, designed to support the strategic ambitions of the state and to deny the use and/or exploitation of maritime areas by others. This is a form of operational territorialization. Finally, normative territorialization refers to the naming, mapping and normalizing of images and claims as a way of performing maritime sovereignty. As I mentioned before, maps are a form of discourse. They are used to construct meaning. The 9-dash line signifies China's mapped imagination of the South China Sea as being part of Chinese territory. It operates alongside narratives of territoriality over maritime areas to constitute a strategy for ordering and controlling space. China's 9-dash line has crept into global popular culture, including through TV shows, movies, and sports. One aim appears to be the normalization of the 9-dash line, meaning that they hope that other states or people within those states come to view this dashed line as a legitimate way of representing China's relationship to the South China Sea. The maritime boundaries of states are rarely depicted in popular maps. Under UNCLOS, these zones do not have the same relationship to the nation as land does. The representation of the dashes in popular maps suggests that for China, land and sea are analogous and linked to nationhood in a way that does not reflect contemporary international law. Naming is also part of normative territorialization. In 2021, the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Ministry of Civil Affairs released a notice listing Chinese names and coordinates of 80 islands, reefs, seamounts, shoals and ridges, 55 that are submerged and therefore not actually subject to sovereignty claims under international law. This naming normalizes the idea that China has ownership over these features. Normalizing the 9-dash line could potentially assist China in dealing with its concerns around strategic squeezing by extending land-based conceptions of control and authority over the near seas and creating a maritime buffer between the Chinese mainland and any potential adversaries. But it's not all defensive. Control within the first island chain could also allow China to extend its maritime influence further afield. For example, some strategists are concerned that control over the South China Sea will provide China with a base and a sanctuary for ballistic missile submarines that will be increasingly used to project military power out into other maritime domains across Asia and the Pacific. More importantly, if China can create an anti-access area denial zone to serve as a defensive buffer and mitigate those perceived vulnerabilities associated with its squeezed geography, then Beijing could potentially further expand its strategic gaze and global maritime ambitions beyond the Asian island chains.